Our reading this morning comes from the New Testament book of Hebrews, one of the finest examples of the Greek language in the New Testament, as I push my glasses up this Sunday morning. From Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such hostility against himself from sinners, so that you may not grow weary in your souls or lose heart.
About 2 decades ago, my father's congregation in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, was celebrating their 275th anniversary. 275 years of this congregation, Holy Trinity, in downtown Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We don't have a lot of things here that we can speak of that have lasted that long in this part of the country. But there they were, 275 years, 1732 instituted, 1768 was when their church was built. And one of the things during their anniversary that they celebrated was when the spire, that big white spire that stood out over the city of Lancaster back when it was built, not much anymore now that the city has grown up around it. But the steeplejacks were contracted about every 10 years or so to whitewash and repaint the white spire up above the church. And so up in the tower on the inside, the companies would take their paint that they'd used to paint, and they would go inside in the steeple, and they would write down the words Jones and Sons 1793. And then there would be another Larson and Jones company in 1799 when they painted the sphere would be signed inside of this great spire that was over the city. So that's what Holy Trinity did to honor their anniversary. My congregation in South Minneapolis, when I was there, celebrated its 75th anniversary, so not quite as old as Trinity in Lancaster. One of the things that we did was publish the Nokomis Heights 75th anniversary cookbook. So you could buy a copy of the cookbook and take it home. Or what we discovered quite quickly is that when we put in a nice categorized fashion all the recipes on the Nokomis Heights website, it quickly became the most visited web pages on our website, because there was all of Ron Holmes' bars that she made, those delicious lemon bars that probably her grandmother taught her to make how many years ago. And her name was listed there attached to the recipe. So we here at St. Andrew, too, now turn our hearts and minds over the past several weeks, really, into celebrating 50 years of ministry, looking back, but also celebrating what opportunities, imagining what it is that St. Andrew could be about here in our next 50 years. We have been talking ad nauseum about how this appeal is going to help shape us. It's going to help bring our ministry even more central and prime to people in our community, support us and support where it is that we need to be and to go. Here at St. Andrew, projects are numerous here, along with some people and program. We have some capital appeal projects that we have to do. A new boiler, a hidden away needs to be replaced, some windows. That's what happens when you have a building that is as old as our building is. But we also look forward to coming alongside Spirit and Pines up at Hackensack, where our ministry continues to be vibrant fruit and grow, and those cabins are old. Some of them are over 90 years old, and so we will be bringing Jericho down. We'll bring the trumpets and the trombones up to camp at the end of the camping season, and we'll bring Jericho down and replace it with a new state-of-the-art cabin that'll be larger than the existing one to serve our people there. And as well as how it is that we're going to lean into the city in Minneapolis here to come alongside mission partners in the city in marvelous ways. All this is part of the anniversary celebration that we are about here at St. Andrew. But I also wanted to think about this passage that Pastor Matthew read for us from the glorious book of Hebrews here in the New Testament that really does, as my sermon title illustrate, running with perseverance. And to add on to that sermon title a little bit more, if we rewind into the previous chapter in the book of Hebrews, what the authors are getting at here is reminding us that Abraham and Sarah and Moses, these pioneers and perfecters of the faith, they were taking a step in faith for what the future was going to hold, that they knew not fully what it was going to be. That was just prior to the reading of Pastor Matthew's that was shared with us here, this notion that we are, in effect, in a stadium full of the great cloud of witnesses, of people who have gone before us, of people who are with us now in this time. But I also would argue, too, that there are people who will be among us in the future that will cheer us on, because God's love, God's grace, God's peace in our Lord Jesus needs to be made known in new and vital and in different and dynamic ways moving forward. So it is this stadium image of how this running of the race that's happened, and there are those that we remember who are finished running the race. They take a seat in the stadium like Jesus and cheer us on for the next steps for those of us who continue along on the way. And it's this kind of blessing that's part of St. Andrew Lutheran Church, that we do have such a great cloud of witnesses, past and present now, who cheer us along the way. Let's rewind the clock here about 35 years or so. You heard last week and in prior opportunities here that this land that we are situated on is the Anderson family farm. Right? So Tom Anderson is part of our church. There are other Andersons that are here. The Anderson name is kind of here and there and everywhere in Eden Prairie, isn't it? Anderson Lakes Parkway, things kind of like that. But the Anderson name is a big one. And so Tom tells the story about how when his father and his parents moved to this land, and the house is basically right where I am standing, overlooking the creek that was there and the farm fields that were out over here. When it was time for his father to say no more farming, he said very specifically, he said, there will be no McDonald's on my farm. E-I-E-I-O. No, he didn't add that refrain. But he said that there will be no McDonald's on this farm. It's up by Eden Prairie Mall now, of course. He instead was part of this congregation, and in partnership with MTS, the corporation over here, the industrial firm over here, this place was sold and built. And this land then went from growing corn, I like to say, to growing people and growing faith. Growing dynamicness, or just growing people who don't, like corn would feed someone for a day, right? As we read in the Bible, but in the image of God and in faith, living food, living in the Spirit, lasts a lifetime. And so these disciples, the people who would be raised here, would go out and do the life-giving work that we still do to this day. And so let's rewind the clock here. And this is, though, before I do that, this is what the current configuration looks like. And I'm going to use my little trusty laser pointer. This is the MTS building here, our congregation here, of course, Technology Drive, and then the Highway 5212 is out there, right? Do you have your bearings? Because 60 years ago, 80 years ago, here is the beginning of the highway is here. There's no such thing as technology, farm fields and so forth all around. But this vision of the Anderson family comes to pass. And so here we are, no lake at all that we call Purgatory Lake or Pavilion or anything. But when we covered the ground with concrete, the water needs to go someplace. And so they dredged out what the lake is now. But here, St. Andrew stands. It is wonderful to be part of this kind of vision that has happened before us, and as we live through it and dream about what the next steps are. Second illustration comes literally as an illustrator. There's a member of our congregation named Carl Nelson. Many years, Carl was a part of this congregation, and he was an illustrator. He was an artist. He was a painter, kind, soft-spoken, sang in the choir. But one of his gifts was to give to St. Andrew his heart, his mind, his talents, to bring his art to life here in this place, so that what you now, friends, see and feel at St. Andrew is very much a sense of what Carl Nelson gave to us in his life and in his faithful contributions. For instance, when you think about illustrations, have you seen something like this before here at St. Andrew? It became this piece of art that's hanging right through the windows there above the stairwell. So that was one of his contributions here to St. Andrew. Additionally, a number of years ago, 20 years ago, Carl and the staff were starting to ponder, okay, so what are we going to do for the next derivation of St. Andrew architecturally here? And started, okay, let's try, how about this cross or that cross or this cross or that cross? He was very much a writer, and I have this big notebook in my office where he drew and wrote and schemed. And then eventually it formed up around this one, of course. And in Carl's own words, woven cross, we are interconnected. So we have, of course, a cross here. We have a cross over in the fellowship hall, in case you haven't noticed. It's even on the soundboard over there in the corner of the room. We even have this cross, this woven together cross up in Anderson Chapel at Spirit in the Pines. Thank you, and thanks be to God for Carl Nelson and his gifts. Finally, though, he also was trying to imagine when this building was built, the one that we are currently in 30 years ago. What do we do to make it different? What do we do to celebrate our holy seasons? Let's think about banners. What could they look like? Rounded or squared off or high or low? And then in his sketchbook, he was starting to think through butterflies. What would they look like? And then further along, then, as I turn the pages in the book, he is risen and Alleluia are mentioned there with the butterflies. And of course, I have them behind me here as well. So Shauna Berg is our children's youth and family minister here at St. Andrew, who hosts chapel in this space here with all of our early learning kids who come in. These are the 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, and all the teachers come in and keep them all contained. And Miss Shauna has 15 minutes with them to make the points that she would like to make in her teaching time, and brings a lot of energy to that. Well, when the kids came in, they saw the butterflies on the walls and were admiring them, were distracted by them. And so Shauna pivoted her lesson into talking about butterflies, from caterpillars to a cocoon to new life. It's the story of Jesus and the resurrection. What Carl dreamed up on those notepads lives on now in those 2, 3, and 4-year-olds. And we get a chance to celebrate it here as well, as Carl sits in the stands and cheers us on. Thanks be to God for Carl Nelson. And then another final story here, too, is this woman here named Liz Baugh. She was the very first person here at St. Andrew who was an accompanist and a worship leader 50 years ago. Great pianist, very beloved, and a person who I met for just about a year and a half or so in my first years here at St. Andrew. And so I'm only scratching the surface of how much she was admired. Well, she was so admired that when she retired, people were still longing for her music. And so they created a CD, then a couple of CDs, actually. One of them is entitled Bringing Us Home, Music of Home by pianist Elizabeth Baugh. And just this last Sunday, I was helping to serve pancakes at our festive circus that we had to honor our anniversary and to give thanks for all the good things that is St. Andrew. Standing in line, 3 pancakes here, 3 pancakes there, and Kathy Mason comes up to me. Gives me a hug, and we reconnect again because Lorraine, her mother, had passed away the week before. And so she wanted, and we were texting and we were in touch with each other. And she wanted to tell me that Pastor Peter, for the last few days of my mom Lorraine's life, I had playing on the CD player, Liz Baugh's Bringing Us Home. So she had grown up with this music, had Kathy, longtime members, and her mother, Lorraine, was hearing songs like Simple Gifts, The Comfort of Home, Morning at Home, and Heavenly Home, among some of the tracks that are on this Bringing Us Home CD by Elizabeth Baugh. The life of this church, the ministry of this church, the faith that is a part of us living on here now in this latest generation of St. Andrew Church leadership. I got to thinking about the Stone Arch Bridge in Minneapolis. When was the last time you walked over it or biked over it or drove past it and noticed it there? It's open again after being closed for a couple of years for renovations. I don't know a lot about the bridge, but I can look up as quickly as you can. 1883 is when it was dedicated. It was a project sponsored by James J. Hill, the railroader, and the wealthy man who did those kinds of things in our community. I don't know, though, very much about any of the other people that built that bridge and the bridge that still stands today, almost 150 years later. I don't have any names. I don't have any companies. I don't have any steeplejack signatures that are up in the tower of the church in Lancaster as it is there. But I like the image of how this bridge, every time someone goes from one side to the other, mission is accomplished. If it is a load of trains that went over it for decades, or if it's a runner, a jogger, a hiker, a stroller, or a trike that make their way over, when the people make it onto the other side, if they're going north to south or south to north, mission accomplished. The bridge does its thing. And it makes me think a little bit about how a bridge from something to another thing is a bit how a church desires to function. That it is built on these foundations of stones that are large, stones that are small, with masons that are really good at what they do, confidence in what it is that it is going to become, with this notion of moving people from one side to another. Our church, St. Andrew Lutheran Church, for 50 years has been moving people in faith. Maybe one side of the river is a side of loneliness, of frustration, of challenge, or just of unknowing. And somehow, some way, St. Andrew Lutheran Church has invited some people across the bridge to a place of belonging, to a place of welcome, to a place of warmth, to a place of love that only Jesus can provide, a love that is far more extravagant and a peace that surpasses understanding, to move people across. A 50th anniversary, a 75th, or a 275th anniversary is again an invitation for us to think about what it is like to be part of a community of faith that moves people. People that you know around you that are seated with you, or people that we have no idea who they are or where they are, but their stories need to be linked with ours. With this race, this persevering race toward love and grace and peace that we all play a part in building, so that others may come to know and to understand, to be part of what God desires for the world: wholeness, healing, love, and grace. Thank you for the way in which you are part of this congregation, for the way in which you give of your gifts, great or small, because all together we move people to the side of light and life. Thanks be to God. Amen. Thank you for listening to this worship podcast of St. Andrew Lutheran Church. We hope that this recording provides you with a moment of God's grace wherever this finds you. Any contribution you make to St. Andrew will bolster our ministry and outreach, including our podcasting directly to you. You can do so online. Thank you for joining us for this podcast, and I wish you every blessing from Christ today.